Hi, I'm Forrest Key. Let's get right into commercial and film post-production. What is post-production? Well, post-production is something that I love, and we're going to talk about it in depth here today. But before we do that, let's take a step back and let's just think about creating a program. What's involved in creating a program? Basically, there's three phases: pre-production, production, and post-production. Pre-production being everything we do at the beginning, from finding a script, designing the program, doing art direction and storyboards to think about the look and feel, casting our cast of characters, getting all the staff together that we're going to need, the director and the crew for the actual shoot. Everything involves budgeting and finding locations and actually getting everything scheduled so that everyone arrives on time and at the right moment to actually do the production. Production. This is the big enchilada. All the pre-production organization has taken place. We arrive at the set, we turn on the lights, we roll the cameras, and we start spending money like crazy. This is where we shoot our film or video and get out quick. We want to spend as little time in production as possible because it's so expensive. Every day counts. We want to get out of production and into post-production. Post-production, and here's the fun stuff. Post-production is everything we do from the moment that film or video is in the can, so to speak, where we've shot the elements, and everything we do from there to the time that we actually have a finished program. That includes doing the editing, doing the visual effects, titles and graphics, all the audio, sweetening, and in syncopation to put these elements together into the final program. So let's talk about post-production. We're going to go over the process of post-production, not the specifics, nitty-gritty of what buttons we push on a keyboard, but rather what is the process that gets us from the film as shot in the video or on film and how it gets finished into a program that we deliver. As an example of the post-production process, we're going to focus on an independent film by director Corey Rosen called Keep Clear. Let's take a look at Keep Clear as the finished product.
Yeah.
Since your delivery mechanism is what drives post-production, we have to remember that if we were delivering something for the web or for other forms of internet distribution, maybe something as a DVD or a CD-ROM, that would really dictate how our post-production process worked. We wouldn't have to do a lot of the same things. I'm going to focus on video and film as our delivery mechanisms, and I'll basically first cover video and then go back and cover the film and the differences that would be included for film. There's lots and lots of detail for each of these, and what we're going to try to focus on is the process. So let's go ahead and take a look here in our post-production overview. Our first step is going to be to shoot the film or the video. And again, this is assuming a video delivery, but in either case, you might be shooting film or video for that video delivery. And the result of that is going to be the master tapes. We'll talk about that in a second. From there, we're going to go to either telecine or to duplication, and this is going to produce our offline work tapes. From there, with those offline work tapes, we're going to go into editorial and pre-visualization. And here we're going to create an EDL, which I'll be going into in detail. Once that editorial pre-visualization takes place, we go back to telecine or we digitize at high res, which again we'll cover shortly, so that we can then begin our effects work, our audio design, and do our editorial dailies. This whole process here is what's referred to usually as editing and conforming, bringing it all together, which finishes up with an online edit, which is where we actually finish the program and then go into duplication or archiving. Conversely, for film, you can see that the process is very similar. We shoot the film, we do our telecine. While this is going on, pure digital practical effects work begins. Then we go into our editorial and pre-visualization stage. We scan our negative, and the digital process begins where we do our effects, audio design, and editorial dailies once more. From there, we do our film out to get back to film, cut our negative, and then do duplication and archiving. Let's go through step by step each of these processes, starting with shooting film or video. So when you shoot film or video, the thing to remember here is this is going to be your master format. This is as good as it's ever going to get. You're going to make a decision here that's going to forever affect your production. Whether if you shoot on video, on a high-quality videotape, or on a high-quality film, you're going to have great image quality throughout the entire production. If you try to save money here at the beginning, that's what you're going to be locked into forever. Things to consider about film is that film is by far the highest possible quality you're going to get. It's ultra high resolution, it's very versatile, it has much better response to color and fidelity of images, and is going to, in general, produce the best quality visuals that you're ever going to get. On videotape, you have a couple things to consider. One would be whether you're using digital or analog tape. Digital kind of has this connotation of being better, and in many cases it is, but it's not that simple. There are good things and bad things about digital and analog, and we'll talk about those. Let's look at videotape formats. In videotape formats, you've got several formats that are digital, such as high definition, D16, D1, which is one of the more important ones we'll be talking about in depth, which is also called CCR 601. We've also got D2, D5, and a couple other potpourri of other manufacturers' formats. Digibetacam, which is one of the big standards these days. And then we've got lower-end consumer and news-gathering digital formats like DV, DV-Cam, and Mini-DV. On the analog side, we've also got high definition, which is very nice quality, the kind of old school 1-inch videotape, which is not seen that much these days, Betacam, which is kind of the standard, and then the lower quality 3/4 inch SVHS, High 8, VHS, and good old Betamax, my favorite. The thing to consider about both digital and analog formats is that as the quality goes up, the cost goes up. So there's a direct relationship between how much money you spend on your tape stock and on your equipment to acquire video and edit video and what the results are going to be. For more specifics on digital images themselves, refer to my tape, Film and Video as Digital Images, later in this section. Let's talk about some specifics about film. Film is better, but it costs more. The higher resolution the negative, the more image information. This is an exponential relationship. So twice the negative width means 4 times the information on that negative, not twice the information. If you can afford it, you want to use the highest quality film possible for your shooting, because then you'll have that resolution throughout the entire post-production process. Both film and video images deteriorate when they're handled. Even digital images or very high quality film, the more that it's touched or passed through machines to copy it or look at it, the more that is actually exposed to oxygen and to light and to different physical elements of friction, etc. And little by little they start to deteriorate. So these master elements, once we've shot them, these are kind of like our crown jewels, and we want to protect them as much as possible. We want to make copies right away and use copies whenever possible so that we only touch the masters when we need to. Now we're ready to go to telecine or duplication to actually get an image that we can work with in our editorial process. Telecine is something I love just because of the name, telecine. Imagine what culture invented that word. Obviously it's the Brits. Who would call it telecine otherwise? Cine refers to cinema, tele to television. Telecine is the process of getting film onto video so that we can manipulate it with video equipment or digital equipment. The telecine itself is essentially a film scanner that scans film at pristine quality at real-time speeds of 30 FPS, 25 FPS, or 24 FPS. Let's take a look at how a telecine actually works. You can see that the film, the negative that was passed through the camera, our master film, is actually loaded up on one side of the device. That film is then spooled through the scanner part of the telecine and then rolled into a pickup reel. Here's a telecine. Let's take a look at it. On the left-hand side, we're going to roll our negative film up, and we're going to string it through the scanning device and into the pickup rail. Thus, as the film passes through the scanning device, an LCD can pick up the different intensities of red, green, and blue light and actually convert those into a digital image which can be passed off to videotape. Pretty neat stuff, huh? Let's talk about film weave. This is a relatively subtle concept, but I think it'll illustrate something interesting about the telecine and how telecines work. If you look at this piece of film here, you can see that there's pin registration sprockets along the edge of the film. And this is used in transporting the film on any kind of device, whether that be a camera or a telecine itself. But in the case of the telecine, we're talking about moving this film at 24 frames per second, which is a couple of feet of film every second shooting through this device. And we're trying to scan these relatively small pieces of film that are only 35 millimeters wide in general. And what happens is when trying to do this in real time, we often introduce a little subtle weave. And if each one of those layers is weaving just a tiny bit, you're going to see that as kind of a misalignment. It's going to give away that there's something funny going on in the shot. So to get rid of film weave, there's a couple of solutions. But one way to correct for this is by a process called pin registration. In pin registration, what you do is before scanning the footage for an effect shot, you actually stick a group of pins in and push down hard on the film element against the scanning device. And this allows you to get a registered scan where each frame is pushed in the exact same way. The problem is that if you do this, you have to actually stick these pins in and take them out for every frame, and you lose the real-time capability. Now, instead of doing 24 frames per second, you might be doing 1 or even half a frame per second because it takes a while to get those pins in, scan, get the pins out, go on to the next frame. So pin registration is one way. It's very expensive because you suddenly are only doing a couple of frames per second and you stretch into many hours to scan your elements. And it's also not available all the time. Sometimes it's not an option to do pin registration. Not all telecines are equipped with pin registration. Another way to solve film weave is to actually use tracking and track an element on a shot that isn't moving and then stabilize that as a post-production process. We'll take a look at how that would be done when we get into tracking and stabilizing in another section of the visual effects series. At this stage of the process, we're talking about the one-light telecine. This is the preliminary telecine. We'll actually be coming back to telecine later in post-production. In this pass, in the one light, all we're trying to do is get a first pass of the film onto video so that we can start working with it. Usually at this point, the quantity of footage at this stage is prohibitive. We've got lots and lots of footage that we shot, and we don't know which pieces of footage we want for our visual effects or for our edit. So what we want to do is we want to get all of it as quickly as possible by spending as little time in telecine as possible. We want to get all of it over onto video so that we can then do the actual editing and pre-visualization of our effects work. This is called a one light because it refers to an older traditional process that involved using lights to actually strike low-cost prints of film. So not everyone refers to them as one light. Sometimes people refer to them as the dirt and cheap, quick and easy pass at telecine, where instead of going in and fine-tuning your color, you're just dumping it onto videotape. Essentially, what we're looking for in the one lights is the base colors, the general hues of colors. If there's an orange on the set and we know it was orange, we want to make that orange again. But we're not going to get anywhere near a nice finished color balance. That's a very involved process we'll get to a little bit later. During this one light, what we're going to do is we're actually going to have the telecine operator burn a window that represents time code and key code information for the film that we're transferring. Here's an example of what key code information looks like, and you can see that the actual key code is derived from the film itself, the negative itself. All the manufacturers of negative, Fuji and Kodak, etc., actually produce batches of film with these identification numbers. There's 4 groups of 4 digits here, followed by a plus sign and then a number of frames. And the way this is measured is the first 4 digits represent the manufacturer of the stock, in this case Kodak, and then the batch number. And these batches can be thousands and thousands of feet of film. So as you buy your film for your shoot, you might get several different batches of film. The next group is another identifier, that the master film group that this film came from, followed by the actual footage counter. This is what we're interested in. Here we have 8 digits that represent the foot that we are looking at within that batch. So in this case, foot 2520 is the 2,520th foot of film. And then the plus sign then tells us how many frames after the foot marker we are. If you look at this edge of the negative, you see that here is an indicator for a foot, and here is another indicator for a foot. And in between, we have 15 frames. There's actually 16 frames, but the 16th frame is where the counter rolls over to 0, 0. So there's actually, in 1 foot of film, of 35 millimeter film, we have exactly 16 frames of 35 millimeter image. This counting device of base 16 is what's used to keep track of all key code, is what we call it, for all your negative. And using this number, we can identify a unique frame of film from all the film that you've shot. So if I give you a key code number, a negative cutter can go out, look through the film, and actually find that exact same frame that you're looking for. Along with the key code information, we're actually going to create a time code burn-in window. Time code is a little bit different. We have a counter that either goes from 00 up to 24 and then rolls over again. That would be PAL, so there's 25 frames per second, or a 00 going up to 29 and then rolling over, which would be 30 frames per second for NTSC. As this rolls over, eventually we get up to 23 hours, 59 minutes, 59 seconds, and either 29 or 24 frames, and then once we turn that over, we roll back to 000. In the case of time code for video, there's actually a distinction between two kinds of time code that are very important. One is called drop frame, and the other is called non-drop frame. The colon refers to non-drop frame time code. This is time code where a frame is a frame is a frame, and as time goes on, we're looking at literally how many frames. So we could actually multiply out the number of seconds times the number of frames and get the total frames in the program. The other kind of time code is drop frame time code. Drop frame time code is trying to adjust for some of the differences in time between what's actually registered by the time code and what's actually experienced when playing back a tape over the air in a broadcast environment. There's a slight difference which we can actually quantify, which actually causes the time code to get ahead of itself in terms of how much program time there really is. You can imagine for broadcasters this is a big problem because they have to actually know how long something is going to be on the air, so that they're expecting it to be 60 minutes long. It actually is 60 minutes long and not 62 minutes long, which might be the case if we were dealing with non-drop frame time code. So look for the semicolon or the colon to know whether you're dealing with drop frame or non-drop frame time code. While we're on the subject of non-drop frame or drop frame time code, in the case of visual effects, don't go anywhere near drop frame time code. Drop frame time code is really just a final mastering issue so that when you send elements to the broadcasters, they know what's going on with the time code. When you're doing your post-production, you don't want to have to be thinking about, oh, was there a drop frame there? How many frames do I really have? You want to be able to do the math and know that that's how many frames you're going to have. So stick to non-drop frame time code for visual effects work. Let's take a look here at some actual one-light transfers for Keep Clear, and you can see both the time code and the key code windows rolling with the footage. And by looking at these, I can find out where this film is on the negative, and I can also see where I am on the videotape that I'm looking at. So it allows me to keep track of both video frames and film frames throughout the entire post-production process. These are kind of our geographical surveys of our footage. This is what we're going to build our map, our later edit decision list out of. These numbers are really the tracking devices that we'll use throughout post-production. There's a subtle issue here that I'm going to skip for now, which is how do we syncopate these different time bases? The time code is keeping track of 25 or 30 frames per second, whereas the key code is a 24 frame per second base because film is usually started at 24 frames per second. To get these two together, we're going to have to go into 3-2 pull down and some other techniques that allow these different time bases to be interchangeable. I'm going to cover all that in a different program. For now, let's go ahead and move on and see how this time code and key code is going to be tracked through the post-production process. Here's a little tip about post-production and managing your time code sequences so that you know what's going on. You can help yourself out by, every time you start a new videotape, numbering it with a different first hour. So for example, my first videotape of offline elements would be starting at hour 1. My second tape would be hour 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., up to 24 hours, so I'd have 24 tapes starting on even hours. If I had a 25th hour and a 26th hour, what I can do, and what's normally done, is you roll over into hours and a half. Because when you're transferring film to video, you never have 30 minutes at a time. It's usually 4 to 8 minutes. So what that means is that 1 hour, 30 minutes is totally clear and legitimate. So your 25th hour of footage would actually be transferred at 1 hour, 30 minutes, and then 2 hours, 30 minutes, etc. Once you get to 48 tapes, I don't know what they do. I've never had a problem with that. That's quite a lot of footage, but I would imagine you would then go back into some other redundancy. And what this helps you do is, as a post supervisor, you can look at the beginning of a tape and go, oh, this is my 5th tape, or this is my 7th tape. So it creates a kind of hidden agenda of it creates a kind of hidden key of what each time code is in terms of what tape it is in the sequence. This is a really helpful thing to do, and little things like this, if you use them consistently, really help you to keep track of all your elements without getting confused. So now that we've done our one-light telecine, we now have a series of footage that we can actually use for our editorial process. Once we go into editing and pre-visualization, what we want to do is we want to come out with an edit decision list. The edit decision list is a blueprint of everything that we're going to do with the program. What elements are going to be used, where, how long, when, and what sequence. That master storytelling device of editing is going to sequence these elements together so that we can actually finish the program. So in the case of Keep Clear, let's take a look at some of our offline one-light transfer. Here we have a couple of the effect shots, and you can see that we've got our key code and our time code windows. Several of these elements were shot with effects in mind. Some of these elements weren't shot with the effects in mind, and in many cases we have multiple takes. We're not sure which take we want to use. So we want to go into an edit session and do a combination of offline editing to decide what the sequence of the shots will be, what the timing of the shots will be, as well as pre-visualizing what the effect shots themselves will be, which elements and what the timings will be on those elements, and how they're going to build together to create the final effect shot. We've already covered in another program in the series all the details of pre-visualization and offline editing, and refer back to that program for more details. But basically what we've decided with Keep Clear is that these are the elements we're going to use for one of the visual effect shots, the abduction shot. So you can see I've got different elements here that each of which I've timed and picked just the piece that I want, just the 140 frames or so that I'm actually going to use in the shot. And I've actually sequenced all these together and written down their time codes and their key code numbers so that I can incorporate them into an EDL. This EDL is our master blueprint list. We're going to use it to determine the sequence and the order of the shots that we're going to have in our visual effects work. Nonlinear editing applications all can export these EDLs. So after you've created an edit, the nonlinear editing application knows which time codes were used, and in some cases which key codes were used, and can actually spit out an EDL or a cut list, which is what a film list is referred to, that uses key code numbers instead of time code. And these lists can then be used to either go back to telecine to do another transfer at higher quality, or for actually finishing on a nonlinear system or in a linear traditional tape-to-tape editing environment where the EDL can sequence the different videotape sources to edit from this deck onto this deck, and one after another you can string together your edits. EDLs historically were just used as a conforming list, as a list that was used to assemble elements. But with the high-quality nonlinear editing systems that are available today, they're often used to actually batch digitize all of your footage in at higher quality into the nonlinear editing system, and you can finish the program right there and then. So the limitation with EDLs is that they're great for expressing linear time, one shot after the other, but they're not very good at expressing a vertical stack of effects and how different layers combine together to create a composite. For that, it's really the post supervisor's job to make a list for his or herself to keep track of these elements and to write down the key codes in a way that makes sense to them. Important things to keep track of when tracking elements for visual effects are a consistent shot naming structure. For example, in Keep Clear, every shot is prefaced by a KC for Keep Clear, followed by 2 initials to represent the type of shot or the sequence of shots. We've characterized 4 shots in Keep Clear as the big money shots. These are the shots that are relatively complex that we're going to spend a lot of time on. So we name those BM1 through BM4. It's also really important to name each element within an effect shot. So in the case of BM4, which is our big money shot, the abduction shot, we actually have like 15 elements. So the naming convention would be KC for Keep Clear, BM4 for the shot, a period, and then the element. And those elements are usually named whether they're foreground or background or blue screen elements, often abbreviated FG, BG for background, BS for blue screen. So a post supervisor takes several copious notes of all these elements, their key codes, their time codes, where they are in video, where they were on film, and then organizes this information and prepares for the final color telecine, where we'll go back and actually get these elements again at higher quality with final color. Here's an example of a chart that I made to track Keep Clear. I have a still frame to represent what that frame looks like in case I forget, because often just looking at the name of the element, I don't remember what it was. So having a little still frame is really helpful. The time code, which tells me where it is on tape, the length of the shot in terms of how many frames that shot is or that element is within the shot. And then often what we do is we add handles. Handles are a little bit of a couple of frames before and after the shot so that we have a little extra. That's because editors often change their minds, the client might change their mind, the director might change their mind. And what happens is if you've already scanned the footage and haven't allowed for a little bit of slippage to the before and after, you basically have to go back and do the scanning again or do the transfer again. So it's nice to always have like 5 to 10, maybe 15 frames of handle on the head and tails of your shots, of your elements. Here's the EDL for Keep Clear. You can see that at the top we have the title for the name of the cut. This is the Keep Clear final cut list. We have on the left a column that indicates the edit decision number. The next column is my source reel number, and you can see that if I scan through real quickly that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And here at the bottom of the list we actually have a little index that tells me what each numbered reel is in terms of its actual name. I'm able, inside of my nonlinear editor, to give each reel a name, but that's only expressed with a number inside of the EDL. So I have a little matrix at the bottom here so that I can remember what that actual source tape was. The next column is the type of event, whether that be a cut, a dissolve, or a wipe. And Keep Clear, we have a couple dissolves but no wipes and several cuts. Right before that, in this middle column, we have the type of cut or dissolve, which can be either a video or an audio cut. Usually audio tracks can be numbered as many as 1 through 4, so there might be an A1 through A2, A3, A4 next to one of these edits. By the way, post-production on Keep Clear was infinitely simpler because we shot everything MOS. What is MOS exactly? Ooh, it's something European, I think German, for mit en son, which means without sound. Basically, MOS is an acronym used often to refer to footage that was shot without any sound being recorded to synchronize together. The next thing in the edit decision list is the source in and out and the record in and out. And this is this kind of like behemoth of a list of numbers here, which is 4 columns of different time codes. And if you see here, I've got my source in time and my source out time. And that tells me where on that tape I can find the footage for this edit, the in and the out. And from that, any computer can tell the duration. It's not actually listed explicitly here, but just by subtracting that in from that out, we can find out how long that edit is. On the next column, we have the record in and out. And these are going to be identical in duration to the source in and outs, but they're going to represent where this footage is to be copied to or moved to in the final program. And you can see that this program starts, the first edit starts on hour 1, 000000, a nice even time code number. And if I go down to the very end here and look at the last edit, you can see that it ends on minute 1, 55 seconds and 12 frames. Just by looking at this, I can tell that this program is 1 minute 55 and 12 seconds long. Now, this is all assuming video frame rates. This is a video edit decision list. This particular EDL is in CMX 3400 format. There are several EDL formats, and in each format there are different kinds of information that can be expressed in slightly different ways. In the case of Keep Clear, we're not finishing this program on video. In other words, we're not going to be cutting all this video footage together to create a 30 frames per second or 25 frames per second video program. We're actually going to be going back and cutting the film together. And to do that, we need to actually have what's called a scan or neg cut list. So for Keep Clear, here's the scan list that I've created. Again, this is my own personal Forest Key format EDL. There's no standard for this, but pretty much any scan list is going to have these kinds of informations on them. You can see on the left I have the name of the shot. Again, I've come up with a very consistent naming convention so that I always know how I've named the shots, and I can tell the rest of the people working in post-production how the shots are named, so we all speak the same language. Then I have my element, and again, you can see how the elements are named. So for example, for BM4, I have foreground elements 1 through 11, and those are all the individual elements that we looked at earlier. Then I have a little description, which helps me and the director communicate to one another, because he thinks of everything by the kind of instrument in the band, and I think of it as just a number, because the truth is I don't know the different instruments. So, a sousaphone is something I've never heard of. In the next column, I have the roll number, and this is similar to the tape number in the EDL, and it tells me where I can find those frames, but not on the videotapes. This is actually what physical piece of negative that went through the camera, and those are numbered on location by a camera assistant. So here we have 4 camera rolls that went through the camera. So we have these were each about 500 feet long, so we have about 2,000 feet of film. These scene numbers are the scene numbers that Corey Rosen, the director, used to number his storyboards. And on location, every slate before the take actually indicates what element, based on the storyboard numbering, is going to be shot. That way, as we're looking at the negative or the video dailies, we can actually go through and say, oh, this is the element that we called 12BS for 12 blue screen. The following number here in this column is the take. And the take number is how many takes we took on location, how many attempts we had at getting the footage that we wanted. Usually in a low-budget production like Keep Clear, you're not going to see too many takes because every take is going to eat up more film and more time. Usually we only did 1 or 2 takes in Keep Clear, but in a professional production you might see, of a commercial or a feature film, you might see as many as 50 or 100 different takes. Here we see the cut in and out key code information. And this key code information, what it reflects is where the slate was during the shoot and where the flash was. The flash is usually right at the end. As the camera slows down, the last frame or two after it stops is actually overexposed, and it looks like a flash of bright light. Here's an example. You can see a flash in the one light transfer. This slate number and this flash number, or subsequent slate, which often is right after the take, these are the places where I'm actually going to have my negative cutter cut the negative. I wouldn't want the negative cutter to cut anywhere else other than a slate or a flash, because when the negative is cut, I'm slightly damaging the negative on the frame before and after where I cut. So by cutting only on a slate or a flash, what I'm making sure of is that if for some reason I had to put that negative back together, I could assemble things back together and not have missed anything other than the slate or the flash itself. Next in the column on the pull list, you see a scan in and a scan out. These two numbers are just footage numbers, again, because they fall within the key code number, that we've already determined, the larger 16-character number. And the footage counter is measured not only in the feet, but in frames. So you can see that for the first element here, the car establishing shot, in Big Money shot number 1, I want to scan from footage 2615, 00, meaning right on the footage counter, to frame 2617, 00. And the scan total in frames is 32 frames. Now, for all these scan counts, I've actually included about 5 frames of head and tail handles. So I've actually given myself a little bit more than we think we need, but not too much more, because I'm trying to cut down on costs and I don't want to have too much extra footage scanned. So as we go through this list, the last column we have is a little bit of a kind of like notes column. And you can see that in some cases I've made a note to scan an element at half res, or to scan for introduction, or scan for a reverse print. Little notes that I've made to myself to keep track of why I'm scanning this element, or what we're going to do with it, or what the purpose is. But basically this list contains a kind of a blueprint of what needs to be cut from the negative and scanned so that we can do visual effects work with it. This is not the final conform list of how the negative will be cut together. That comes a little bit later, after we've done our final edit. So to summarize, the reason that we spent all this time making these EDLs and these pull and scan lists is because this footage, first of all, is very pristine. We don't want to touch it, so we don't want to be messing around in our edit process with these high-quality negative elements or high-quality master video elements. And secondly, because there's so much footage to deal with, we never shoot in a 1-to-1 ratio with our final program. So for Keep Clear, which was a under 2-minute program, we actually shot close to 15 minutes worth of footage. If we had transferred and scanned all 15 minutes worth of footage, we'd be dealing with almost 10 times more information than we really need to deal with for the program. So by making an offline quality version in the one-light transfers, doing our offline edit and pre-visualization, and then making very precise edit decision lists and pull and scan lists, we kind of have distilled the information down to something much more manageable of about maybe 3 minutes worth of footage that we're now going to go back and get at higher quality and scan digitally for film finishing. By the way, one more little tidbit about production. When you're actually out there shooting, you have these slates which are clapped down to indicate the beginning of sound and image in syncopation, so that you can actually listen when you're trying to sync up your sound and your slates together. You can listen to that clap sound and know that that's the moment that everything needs to be synced together. There's another use for slates, which is basically to break up the negative visually, so that as a negative cutter is scrolling through the negative looking, he sees a slate and goes, oh, this is an actual beginning of a new shot, and you can actually read the slate, usually using a little loop, which is like a magnifying glass. You can see where you are in the sequence of shots. Often slates are forgotten to be placed at the beginning. In the rush of production, everyone's saying, roll camera, roll sound, action, and sometimes the slate isn't clapped at the beginning, especially when you're shooting MOS without sound. So what will often happen, because it is important to mark every single shot, someone will come in at the very end and put in that slate upside down and say, oops, here it is. And that way the neg cutter can look, and if he sees a slate upside down, he goes, oh, this is a post slate, this was done at the end. I know that this slate refers to what was done earlier. So armed with this information, we're now going to go back and do our final scanning at high resolution in the case of film, or our final color telecine in the case of a commercial production. For final color, it's the same as the first telecine pass. It's the same process. We put the negative up, we scan it, but this time we're going to pay great attention to detail. That's because we can do this because we've already reduced our footage down from relatively high ratios of maybe 10 or 20 to 1 for every minute of film that's actually going to be in the program. We might have 20 minutes of footage. Now we're going to go back in and we're only going to have maybe 2 to 1. We're going to greatly narrow down things to the exact shots that we need and a little bit of handle. As we pass the film negative through the telecine, the colorist, which is the artist that actually controls how that color balance looks as it moves from film onto the digital videotape, actually does a combination of primary and secondary color corrections, which we'll get into in a second. Now, in doing this, we're only going to do it for the select elements from the EDL or pull list. So we're only doing perhaps several, for example, for a 10-minute program, we might only be doing this for about 15 minutes worth of footage. And as that film is passing through, going through the telecine primary and secondary color, it moves to the DaVinci or Poggle, which are the 2 major British brands. Again, the Brits are really involved in this, as you can see. The 2 major brands for color correction devices. And these boxes actually receive the very, very high resolution, high color resolution film information, and then the colorist, or the artist, chooses how that information is narrowed down into a much narrower video space. So in the case of the final color, The tape destinations we might choose would depend on what kind of program we're creating. D1 videotape is the highest quality tape, very expensive to operate and manipulate, but by far the most uncompromising image quality. Usually, however, only the effect shots within a program would be transferred to D1, whereas the rest of the program where no effect shots are needed would go directly to either digibeta in the case of a digital medium, or just pure Betacam, which is quite good quality for the rest of the episodic program. In the case of a shorter program like a commercial or something under a minute or 2 minutes where everything is visual effects or most things are visual effects, you might choose to do everything on a D1 tape, because at that point you're talking about a couple of minutes of footage as opposed to maybe hours of footage for an hour-long TV show or something of that sort. Let's talk about the telecine artist as the colorist. This person is an artist by anyone's estimation. Transferring film to video isn't just a process of saying, give me a little bit more red, a little bit more blue. It's a very subjective process that actually involves much more than just the subjective perception of color. It actually gets into very specific technical limitations of the broadcast spectrums of NTSC and PAL video, issues that are beyond just subjective, but even psychovisual, where the visual experience of watching a television set at home and what those colors might be, the colorist is really playing with that experience of the viewer. There's really a whole slew of intricacies that come up during telecine that dictate what are the results that the colorist is going to try to achieve, with an end in mind of what's going to happen in the further post-processes that will come afterwards. Let's take a look at a really important concept that I want to go over here from an aesthetic point of view and a conceptual point of view, and then I'll go in much more detail in a later program discussing the actual literal digital signal response that's going on during this process. But the main issue I want to go over here is the varying resolution of film and video in terms of how they can represent color, and what, as a result, needs to be done in a telecine process to maintain as much color fidelity as possible. In this chart, I want to show two things. The process by which the film's color resolution and spatial resolution is degraded as it moves towards the video resolution. You have two issues here. You've got the film color, which is based on the way that the chemicals on the film negative actually respond to light, and you have almost infinite, it's not infinite, but billions of different shades of light, of dark, of color that can be represented on that chemical emulsion. And as you move down towards video, that gets severely truncated, almost like it was going through a funnel. And you can see in this graph, as we move towards video, little by little you lose all that color, and you get down to a very narrow little, almost like a straw, where that color has to reside in broadcast video as it's seen by a consumer, by a viewer on their home television. The same goes for the film's spatial resolution. The film negative has relatively large spatial resolution of approximately 2,000 or even 4,000 pixels, so to speak, horizontally. By the time you get down to video, you're talking about as little as 720 pixels horizontally. I'll go into much more detail about these spatial resolutions in terms of digital bits and how this all is constructed in a later program. For now, let's just look at the general tendency. That is, as we go from film, we have really high color and spatial resolution. As we go through the telecine, the colorist has to decide which colors and what aspect of the spatial resolution to focus on, and that gets degraded significantly as we move towards D1 professional video, if we were using D1 as our master format. But then that D1 video is further degraded significantly when we actually broadcast the signal, and see it on an NTSC or PAL television set at home. So realizing that the most resolution in this process is lost at the telecine moment, we realize why the colorist is such an important part of the process. The colorist, he or she, is determining where most of that information is going to be tossed and what's going to be preserved. And once that's done, it's gone forever. So by the time we get into the rest of the post-production process, we've already severely limited our dynamic range and our spatial resolution down to relatively small quality that we're going to have to depend on for all the visual effects. Just as the colorist has the option of basically funneling the very high resolution color information into this much narrower band area of video, when you're scanning film, you do the same process when you choose what resolution and what color depth to choose when scanning your digital files. So now that we've scanned or transferred in final color through a telecine, our final elements at either video or at film resolution, now what we need to do as a post supervisor is we need to match back this new information in terms of where our new final film or video resolution images are on either videotape or on disk drives or some other storage device for the film resolution images. We need to now point our edit decision list to these new elements. With this EDL, I'm now prepared to really embark on the finishing elements of visual effects, finishing audio and sound, and then bringing it all together again in a final conform. Let's take a look at the next step, which would be doing the visual effects work itself. Now, because our entire program here focuses on visual effects specifics, I'm not going to go into great detail here. Rather, let's just summarize what might happen for a specific shot. Let's use an example from Keep Clear. Let's use BM4, Big Money 4, which is one of our most impressive shots in this program. Basically, we've got our offline edit. We've selected some plates. We've transferred those plates at higher quality through full color telecine. We've actually, because this film is being finished on film, we've scanned those at film resolution as well. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to build up this effect shot through a series of effects techniques, including some 3D integration, some 2D work, some compositing of the elements together, and over a period of days and weeks, we actually end up with this final result, Big Money Shot 4. This independent film was done on a relatively low budget, and we had several independent artists moving files around on hard drives, taking stuff to one another's houses. But when we're talking about a more professional product, what we would be looking at is a series of artists working within a post-production environment, usually centralized in a machine control room, an MCR as it's often called. And this machine control room is where all the video decks reside, a lot of the expensive equipment, any dedicated systems like some higher-end SGI boxes or the NT and Macintosh workstations that might be running the software. And then in a series of rooms within the facility, you would have your 2D graphics and animation specific tools, your editorial tools such as your nonlinear editor or your linear online room, any dedicated graphics suite such as a Discrete Logic Flame or a Quantel Henry suite, any 2D compositors working in 2D compositing specific tasks, or any 3D animation artists working on 3D animation specific work. And as you can see, all of these artists are interchanging data and information and actual media assets between each other's workstations by either going through the centralized machine control room or in many cases exchanging data back and forth across a network or by moving actual disk drives or other kinds of sneaker net, so to speak, data back and forth across a facility. And this all assumes that everyone's working within a facility and the data is somehow centralized. Well, more so these days than ever, there's a lot of smaller effects houses or individual artists doing a lot of the effects work. So a lot of the data actually moves between facilities, so to speak, maybe between one artist's office and another, over either a network or through some kind of tape device, whether that be a high-density backup tape like an exabyte or a DLT, or that might be through some hard drives that are physically unplugged and moved around. In the case of the audio design, which is going on simultaneously, as you can see, for both film and video production, audio design is a very separate discipline and is usually done by a separate group of artists working with both writing the music, actually cleaning up any audio that was shot on location. In the case of Keep Clear, we shot everything MOS, so there isn't any dialogue to clean up. But in many cases, you'll have dialogue or sound effects that are recorded on location, as well as a lot of Foley work, which is work that's done on a stage by Foley artists who actually go and create the sounds to simulate things like footsteps or opening and closing doors or chairs that are squeaking in the background. The Foley artist, along with the audio that's been sweetened, so to speak, by the audio design artist, along with the music, all of that is brought together in a kind of parallel post-production process just for audio work. And that work, as it nears completion, is then brought back into the editorial process to be merged together towards the end of the post-production. Throughout this process of audio and effects work being finished, there's actually an editorial process that is ongoing. Just as in the beginning we had an offline edit, while this is going on, we basically start to complete our online edit. Our online edit is the finishing up of the actual finished piece, whether that be a finished negative film cut together piece by piece, or an actual videotape of high quality like a D1 or Digibetacam that actually has the finished edited program together. What might happen during a post-production process is that you might be accumulating cut after cut of your final piece, and basically as an effect shot or as the music elements become finalized, they get dropped in on top, and little by little you approach your final destiny of finishing the program. Usually with effects works, as effects works are completed, multiple takes are created, starting with take one, which represents the first thing that was slapped together by the effects artist, and then building towards the final shot, which would be the one that everyone approves and says, yeah, this is the one that we're going to use. In the case of Keep Clear, the abduction shot actually had about 15 takes before we got to the final take. And you can see here in some of the earlier versions of the shot, we have rough garbage mats representing the edges of elements, and we have less than perfect composition and lighting and integration of elements, including the 3D element for the final shot. As the takes progress, little by little, you start to see the full shot coming together, culminating here with the final shot, which was approved by the director, which is actually the one that gets then taken and finished in the online and cut in as a negative into the final film. During the take process, in other words, as every take is being created, an editor or a post supervisor takes those takes and integrates them back into the edited program. This is because shots need to be evaluated not only on their own for their own content and balance, but also end to end as they fit into the program to check for continuity, timing between shots, lighting, and other kinds of subtleties about color and the visual quality of an image and how they line up as a sequence and not just as an individual shot. Here in Keep Clear, you can see how the abduction shot is dropping into a sequence of shots repeatedly and how minor tweaks are being made to compensate not just for the shot in and of itself, but also in its integration into the rest of the program. As a post supervisor, as this editorial process is going on, it's often necessary to generate a change list. A change list would be an indication that something has changed timing-wise, and that needs to be updated in all the post supervisor's records as well as in the EDL. It's not uncommon for a shot to be dropped from a scene or lengthened or shortened from a scene, and that can change the overall timing and as a result your entire EDL or your negative cut list. During this editorial updating process, during the effects and the audio finishing, what's often passed around is a current cut, which represents the most up-to-date information about visual effects shots and any sound design that's available. In this way, at any time, any artist can look and see where the project is in terms of completion, what's working, what isn't, and always see the most recent take in one place in context. So as all this audio and effects work is completed, and as our EDL is evolving to reflect the most recent cut, basically we get to the really exciting phase of finaling shots. This is where the shot is actually completed, everyone gives a thumbs up, and we actually take that element and master it back to our high quality D1 or back to film in the case of a film finishing project, and we create the final image that will actually be used in the project. In the case of videotape, if you've been working within a computer with a digital image, that series of frames needs to be moved back onto the master tape, probably a D1 or a digibeta in the case of an effect shot. In the case of film with Keep Clear, after every shot was finalized, the shot needed to be recorded back onto film, onto a piece of negative. So the film recorder, much like the scanner, is exposing a piece of negative, unexposed negative film to the red, green, and blue emulsions of the digital file. So basically, the digital file is brought up on a small LCD monitor, and then RG and B gels are used to only let red, green, blue light pass to the negative. And then in 3 sequential passes, different amounts of light are exposed onto the negative. Now, in doing a wedge chart, what we can determine is how much red, green, and blue. So we basically can create a matrix of bracketing of how much red, green, and blue light. This is very similar to how normal color timing is done with traditional film. All film is timed in this fashion to create the final color balance in the negative. It's just that with the digital file, what you're really exposing is instead of one piece of negative to another to do the color timing, you're exposing a digital file to a negative to create the color timing. With our finished elements, it's now time to conform. This is the final edit process. In the case of video, we take all of our elements which have been accumulated on D1 or beta in our master video, highest quality video, and we now assemble them together in an online editing session. Using the EDL we've created, we can cut each piece together end after end, integrate the final audio which has been created separately by our audio and musician talent, and then we have a final master piece of video, which is the entire program. In the case of film, the process is a little different. The film negative needs to be cut together, the original elements that were shot on film, together with the visual effects elements that were recorded out from the computers. These elements are glued together literally on negative, and once they are assembled, we have a master negative. This is the highest quality master we're going to have, but it's actually of very little use to us. We now need to go and actually make copies or prints for different types of distribution or archiving. We also might decide to transfer it to video after it's been cut together on film to have a video version of what was finished on film. With our program now complete, it's now up to us to decide how to actually create duplication copies or actual distribution copies to be sent off to the TV stations or to the theaters for distribution. In the case of video duplication and distribution, we usually have two masters. We have a master cut, which is our actual finished program, whether that be a commercial or a TV show. And then we also have a master work tape, and that would be all of our elements that were transferred through telecine with their final color, all the intermediate effects elements that we created in terms of mats and 3D objects and intermediate takes. All of that is archived in a digital format in terms of a work tape, as well as in the finished program, which might be only 30 seconds long in the case of a commercial. So the master cut is actually duplicated once for channel copies, which is usually done on Betacam and is sent out to the individual TV stations. And another copy is usually made, a digital clone of some kind, as a backup copy. And this would just go into a vault somewhere in different places so that there's more than one copy. Since there's no degradation in the image quality when you make a digital clone, a duplication, you can have multiple copies in different places just in case, since this is what you've labored so hard to finish. These duplications at this point might only cost a couple $100, and it's well worth the effort to make a duplication, since if something ever happened to your master work tape or your master cut, you wouldn't have another copy of it, and your best quality finished element would be gone forever. In the case of film duplication, the process is a little bit more complex. First of all, the film negative is just the negative. The audio can't be married directly onto the negative. So you have two things to store. You have your film negative and you have your master audio tracks, which are usually recorded on some kind of data or magnetic tape, which need to be separately archived or merged together for the actual distribution copies. Normally a negative is actually turned into an intermediate negative, which is then used to make distribution prints. The distribution prints being the actual film positive prints that get sent to the movie theaters, loaded up onto projectors and projected for our enjoyment. When an intermediate negative is made, there's also a very common process which is done with most films that are given some kind of esteem, which is an archival negative. This usually involves actually making a 3-strip backup of the negative, where red, green, and blue are each turned into their own black and white prints, which are a little bit easier to store and don't degrade as quickly. Color negative tends to degrade in a matter of 10 or 15 years. If you go to the theater tomorrow and see Annie Hall, which is only about 20 years old, you'll see that the colors are almost completely washed out and gone. To preserve those colors, it's important to make a tricolor backup print, which is usually done by separating the red, green, and blues using filters onto individual black and white strips. And then these 3 strips can be stored with much higher color fidelity over the years. Testament to this is any of the Technicolor films from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, which were all shot with this 3-color process. If you see any of those prints in theaters today, it's incredibly lush and of great high quality, whereas a film as recent as something from the 1980s would already look washed out if there hadn't been a tricolor print backed up. Regardless, the negative, whether it be a tricolor or a single-pass color negative, is usually stored in a cool, oxygen-free environment where hopefully it won't degrade. But even the best stored films will degrade as rapidly as within a 5, 10, 15-year period, and that's why so many films are actually lost forever. There's many films, I think I've heard a statistic that more than half the films that have been made have already been completely disappeared because there was no way to preserve them. So there you have it, post-production. Like I said, really exciting stuff. Now, this, while it may seem overly complicated or have some subtleties in it that we didn't go into in full detail, what I really wanted to focus on was the process. And as you can see, what we've learned is that the process is dictated not by what you shoot, but rather what you're trying to finish. If you're finishing film, there's one process you'll be following. If you're finishing on video, there's another. And like I said at the beginning, web or DVD or other kinds of delivery would have other subtleties introduced in terms of how the workflow would happen and what kind of things would have to be kept track of. In all cases, post-production is about keeping track of information. There's a tremendous amount of data that accumulates in terms of where things are, on what mediums, at what resolution, what color, what state of interaction and process, what take. All this information needs to be kept track by the post-producer because it's critical to at any time know where all the elements are and to find a way to bring them all together at the very end into the final program. If we look back over what we've covered, we went from shooting our film or video to create the master tapes. Then we produced the offline work tapes by either duplicating to lower quality video or by actually doing the first one light telecine pass to create offline 3/4 inch usually videotapes which we would use for our editing. Then we went into an editorial and pre-visualization phase where we decided how to reduce our sometimes 20-to-1 or 15-to-1 ratio of footage into a much more manageable amount of footage that we can actually do all, finalize our decisions about how the program is going to look and what elements are going to be used in the program. From there, we often go back and do another telecine or at least a redigitizing at higher quality with the original master tapes to get our final elements that we can actually use for the effects work and for the sound design. As that's going on, there's a repeated editorial process which links all this information together, where we repeatedly check and recheck our work and make subtle changes in the editorial timing, all culminating in a final online edit where all the elements are brought together and everything is kind of syncopated in one final master tape or master negative where the final program resides. For further information, I'd like to point you in the direction of a couple other resources that are really excellent for not only visual effects work, but post-production specifically. Namely, I want to point you to Digital Filmmaking, The Changing Art and Craft of Making Motion Pictures. This is a book from Focal Press, released in 1996. There's usually an update every couple of years, so you might look for that in the future. This is authored by Thomas Ohanian and Michael Phillips, who are both real visionaries within the area of post-production and digital imaging finishing for video and film. And this book is just a wealth of information. It has all the details, all the gory information that you're going to want to know about the specifics of the things that we touched on here procedurally within post-production for visual effects. I also want to refer you to the BKSTS, also known as the Moving Image Society. I actually couldn't figure out what these initials really stand for, but I believe it's something to do with British something something science artist something or other. But basically, they have a fantastic website, which is at www.bksts.com. You can also email them at movimage@bksts.demon.company.uk. The BKSTS has an excellent series of wall-mountable posters that outline different aspects of post-production and visual effects work, including really, really graphic details about, literally graphic details in that they're full charts on the wall that you can actually refer to about film formats, audio formats, different tape formats, different procedures of visual effects, different audio procedures. It's really a wealth of information. It's a series of about 10 charts, and I believe they're about $150 US. So it's a real excellent value. You can refer to their website for more information about how to order those. Lastly, here's a little tip that you might find interesting. Go to a post house. Post houses are open to potential customers. If you show up and tell them that you have some post-production work that you're considering doing with their firm and you'd like to get a tour of the facility, you can get a great hands-on tour that way of the machine room, of the different finishing bays. You can see how the actual facilities are laid out and get a feel for what a post house is all about. It's a really fascinating place to be. The clock, when clients are at a post house, the clock is usually ticking away at $800 to $1,000 an hour. So just walking through that and kind of getting a sense of that kind of money being spent can be a really exhilarating experience in and of itself, not to mention a good way to learn more about post-production. And of course, for much more details on all of these subjects and for the gory details on visual effects work, refer to the other programs within the Masters of Visual Effects Classroom series. I hope you enjoyed the tape. Please feel free to email me directly. My email address is available on the website. Be happy to answer any specific questions, and I hope you have a lot of fun doing post-production yourself in the future. Thanks.